In 2004, my wife Rachel and I visited Cambodia with Intrepid Tours. And given Cambodia's modern day history, that is in the mid to late 70s, the Khmer Rouge was butchering its own people, I guess perhaps it was inevitable that as part of the tour group, we'd be bundled onto a tour bus to visit the infamous killing fields of Cambodia. I will never forget stepping off the bus for the first time and seeing the skull tower and its tower of skulls. I'll never forget stepping onto the killing fields and walking along a narrow dirt track, and either side of me, excavated mass graves, where at that time I could still see remnants of clothing and bone fragments of people who were butchered. It was a sad and unsettling place to visit, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. As we, the group, walked back towards the tour bus, a group of kids, Cambodian kids, appeared out of nowhere, and they sprinted towards us and they swarmed us. And when they got to us, I realised that most of them were 5 or 6 years of age, maximum. They were this tall. And they were taking out our shirts, tucking out our pants, they were crying, they were begging for money. I remember it was that moment that the tour guide yelling out to us, or saying to us, guys, don't give them any money. Not because we're heartless, but because if we give them anything, the money goes to people who are manipulating them and will only serve to perpetuate a problem in Cambodia. So we, the tour group, we kept our hands in our pocket and we reboarded the tour bus and we did nothing. Nothing. And that day, I remember this very clearly. I was sitting, my seat was right next door to the tour bus door. And the image or the memory of the tour bus door closing on the kids, and it was still banging on the door, crying, screaming, trying to get us to give $1 or $2. It's a memory I will never forget. And as the tour bus drove off, I was sitting there, I was overwhelmed. I was really sad because I think at that moment I realised that as human beings, it is not part of our DNA to ignore or refrain from helping kids that are in need. It was a heartbreaking experience. And that night, as Rachel and I got back into Phnom Penh, we're walking along the riverbanks of the Mekong River. We saw dozens, if not hundreds more, kids doing the same. They were being exploited. And that night, for the first time in my life, I saw kids being trafficked. It is an evil, despicable act, I'm sure you all agree. And I was so angry about it. But in 2004, I didn't know what I could have done to help that situation. But the next day in Phnom Penh, we had the pleasure of meeting 2 Cambodian restaurateurs who ran restaurants a fraction of the size of this room. They ran as for-profit businesses, and they used their profits to fund programs that took kids off the streets, gave them food, shelter and education, and also taught them a trade or a skill. Whether it's to learn work as a kitchen hand or as a waiter or learn to play an instrument so that when they grow up, they won't be exploited because they have a career to pursue. Those actions, or what the restaurateurs did, are important circuit breakers that broke the cycle of exploitation for those kids. Whilst there was no silver bullet, the restaurateurs did what was within their power to help end an endemic problem in their community. I was inspired. I was inspired because I saw with my own eyes that such a small business or businesses can make such a large difference. I share that Cambodian story with you because I often get asked what was the genesis or what was the inspiration behind Scuba for Change. Whilst I didn't know it at the time, Cambodia 2004 was Scuba for Change's first chapter, first step. Chapter 2, or the second chapter, I had my wife, again Rachel, to thank for this chapter. Because up until early 2001, I was literally petrified of the ocean. The thought of swimming, snorkeling, or heaven forbid, scuba diving was not my deal. My fears were drowning, and also I thought jaws would always just appear out of nowhere to eat me. Seriously, that was my fear. But Rachel knew that this fear was irrational, so as a scuba diver, she introduced me to scuba. And safe to say that my passion for scuba has since surpassed hers. Recently qualified as a dive master, and just for the record, and I know Lucas will back me up on this, seeing sharks underwater is a cool thing, because it is a balanced ecosystem, what we see. But anyway, whenever we travel to developing nations to scuba dive or for general travel, I'm sure you've all had the same experience. We are often greeted with beautiful smiles and warmth from local people. But when we scuba dive, because we do spend a lot of time above water with our dive guides, we interact with them and talk to them, there was a time that I used to detect a lot of sadness from their part. And I never knew where that sadness came from. But as I later learned, that sadness perhaps stems from the fact that they earn little or no money each year. Lucky if they take home $1,500 per annum. $1,500. Perhaps the sadness stems from the fact that they have little or no opportunities to progress within the industries or the sectors or the business they're working in, because they have little or no capacity to fund further education or training so they can get a better paying job and hence better provide for themselves and their families. They've got no such opportunities. These are, I guess, opportunities that we all standing here take for granted. But this problem is not isolated to the scuba diving industry. As we all know, it is a common story in all developing nations. But up until May 2013, I didn't know what role I could play to help rewrite just a small part of that story. The third chapter was May 2013. Rachel and I and our great friend Stefan Gonzalo, you met Gonzalo before, he's our treasurer, we went scuba diving in the Maldives. And unbeknownst to us, we booked ourselves into a Maldivian-owned and operated dive cruise. And cut a very long story short, it was the best scuba diving experience all round I've ever had. And on a long plane ride home, I reflected on the fact that locals, if given an opportunity, can and will run scuba diving operations as good as, if not better than foreigners, contrary to public opinions and beliefs. I reflected on the fact that on this trip, in my interactions with local dive guides and the dive staff, I didn't detect the sadness that I usually sense from these guys. And I'm listening and looking out for it. I didn't get any of this. And for whatever reasons, the memories of Cambodia, the inspiration from Cambodia came rushing back. It was on that plane ride home that I joined the 3 dots. And that I thought we can use scuba diving as a vehicle to create change for people living in developing nations. Scuba changed the idea. It's what?